questions, teaching you more, explaining other things around ingredients, around cooking methods, and everything. So, but before I start, Dr. Tumi will be here to explain and to basically introduce the class. This is a very special class because it's focused on health professionals or people who want to live a healthy lifestyle around diabetes. And she's the expert, so she'll take us through the class. She's the scientist, and I'm the chef. So today is like a very special day. I've never done a class like this where I'm with a proper scientist who understands the subject. I'm always just, I just work from the gut and from my little knowledge around nutrition. But she's the expert, and if there's any technical questions, she's here to help.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's pre-summer diabetes cooking class. This is really an amazing opportunity for me. As Chef was saying, for me it's an honor because as a doctor, this is called practicing culinary medicine, and it's new and it's evolving, and the whole world is moving in this direction. So we are stepping into the future here today, so it's really such an honor. I'd also like to thank PAN and the South African Lifestyle Medicine Association for having me represent them today. Just by way of introduction, my name is Tumi. I'm a specialist physician in internal medicine. My passion and my practice is focused on lifestyle medicine and also weight management in particular. I'm also continuing my work in obesity research. Today I'm here representing the South African Lifestyle Medicine Association. The South African Lifestyle Medicine Association, also known as SALMA, is a non-profit organization that advocates for lifestyle medicine in South Africa. So for those of you who don't know what lifestyle medicine is a powerful field in medicine. It makes use of the evidence-based recommendations in nutrition, physical activity, stress management, restorative sleep, social connection, and reduction of harmful substances to treat, prevent, and reverse chronic conditions. So in my clinical practice, say over the last decade, I've seen the overwhelming effects of diabetes. And from the hospital perspective, you see all the emergencies like diabetes, ketoacidosis, but then you also see the chronic complications like renal failure and sepsis and heart disease, and it takes a real toll. And this really isn't just my personal opinion. So just to give you guys some context, as of 2019, 12.9% of our South African population is living with diabetes. And these numbers are probably not actually that accurate due to the fact that we don't have really great powered epidemiological studies, and also the sad reality that a lot of people are walking around undiagnosed with diabetes. Another scary statistic is the total annual cost of diabetes. Guys, diabetes costs us here in South Africa 29 billion rand a year. And this is mostly from the indirect costs because unlike in Western countries or such, diabetes affects the working age population. So the amount of money and loss of productivity that we get from premature mortality and morbidity is really, really important, and why there's a desperate need for these novel and unique solutions in diabetes management. So as a junior registrar, this led me to the question, why? Why are so many people struggling with their diabetes? And so I decided to go ahead and do my research on diabetes self-management. So in my study, I spoke to over 200 patients living with diabetes, and I explored the research that has been performed around an African context. And in my study, within those 200 people attending a tertiary level hospital with access to glucometers and everything, only 15% were able to control their blood glucose with an HbA1c of less than 7%. And the biggest challenge, according to the statistics and even the literature, was maintaining this diabetes diet. We're able to adhere to what we call the diabetes diet. So what is the reason? It's easy for us to blame willpower, but the challenges, they really, really are real. So from a socioeconomic perspective, the patients have this perception that food is expensive, that healthy food is expensive, but there is also the truth that there's poor access to fresh food. particularly in the setting of load shedding where cold chain is compromised and people don't all have access to electricity. Many South Africans genuinely are. They're living below the poverty line. It's difficult to be able to make ends meet at the end of the day. And so there is this high risk of not only food insecurity, but also nutrient insecurity. Some systemic barriers that we see is, like, for example, the impact of climate change, which Mokgadi has really dedicated her life to, and the over-farming of maize. You know, this is not an indigenous grain, and it takes place of the more resilient grains that should be feeding us. There's also the inappropriate use of front package labeling. You know, these people, this is a real barrier. You get this impression that this is a healthy diet or diabetes friendly, but it's not. And then something from a biological perspective. So when it comes to ultra processed foods, there's science have noticed that there's a particular combination between refined sugars and saturated fats that makes ultra-processed foods particularly addictive, and it stimulates the reward pathway in the brain, and it's actually why junk food is so addictive. And so all of this is a genuine reason and a barrier why this diabetes diet is challenging. So as an expert in lifestyle medicine, as I said, we gather and we aggregate all evidence around before we make recommendations. So there's about four good diets that have been studied that have shown really a real reduction in diabetes risk. And that's the Mediterranean diet, the DASH diet, which is against for hypertension, a vegetarian diet, and a low-fat diet. All four of these diets have been associated with lower diabetes risk, and they all generally have quite a consistent messaging. The first, and I think the most important, is to avoid all ultra-processed foods. They say avoid ultra-processed food, avoid red meat, particularly processed meats, and refined grains and saturated fats, whilst they actually all generally include vegetables, legumes, whole grains, fruits, fish, nuts, and low-fat dairy. So from here, I'll refer to this as a whole food, plant predominant eating pattern. And note I say eating pattern and not diet. So this is what Chef Mokgadi was going to be bringing forward to us today. So the benefits of this way of eating for diabetes are multiple, but first of all, it's high in fiber, which is really good for controlling your HbA1c and lowers your fasting glucose. It also promotes a beneficial gut microbiome, which is also very good for diabetes. So it's a gut microbiome in particular gets stimulated. And then it also supports weight management and reduces inflammation. So this is the benefits of the whole food, plant predominant eating pattern. So now, most of us are healthcare professionals in the audience, so I wanted to just figure out how can we make this more translatable into your consulting rooms? How do we actually make this real life advice for people? So first of all, as we all know, there's no one size fits all for diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is an absolute deficiency in insulin, whereas type 2 diabetes is more on a spectrum of insulin resistance. And so in that way, even treatment targets should be individualized. And so another type of diabetes which we cannot forget is gestational diabetes. So this one is often easy to forget because it tends to end after pregnancy, but the future lifetime risk of getting diabetes is so high, and the impact on the mother and the child makes this a very opportune group that we should consider saving. So with that said, I'm going to give you guys a two-strategy approach on how do you approach your patients living with diabetes. So in strategy number one, this is the kind of patient where we're looking for diabetes prevention and diabetes remission. So first of all, what's diabetes remission? Well, it's something that's very real. It can happen. I think about 3 or 4 weeks ago, they released an ICD-10 code for diabetes remission. So, you can still bill your medical aid while your patients get their diabetes remission. So diabetes remission is defined as having an HbA1c of less than 6.5% for more than 3 months off all diabetes medication. That is something that's very possible. However, it's something you really have to cater who this is particularly for. So for this is more like your highly motivated patients or those who have pre-diabetes and try to prevent getting diabetes, or somebody who's got a history of gestational diabetes, maybe had a big baby, more than 4 kilograms, or other signs that maybe they didn't know they were diagnosed with that, or those who are very early in their type 2 diabetes journey and only on oral agents. So what is the key? So the evidence is quite good. There's 2 very good studies. There's the direct trial, which is on diabetes remission, and then there's the DPPP, the diabetes prevention program. Both of those studies showed quite clearly that a weight loss between 7 to 10% of body weight is enough to be able to put a person either into remission or prevention. So what's our approach? So in this setting, we're going to be talking about a whole food weight loss approach. So here we're going to talk about, as much as we're speaking of calorie restriction, we speak about how to moderate carbs, but however, we not restrict, moderate carbs. And we emphasize high fiber, non-starchy vegetables. Simple way to do that is to emphasize that these non-starchy vegetables cover half the plate. And we want to really avoid extreme carb restriction and high-fat diets. Although those might have good outcomes in the beginning, there's really been no evidence to show any benefit beyond 48 months. And the risk of elevated LDL cholesterols are just too high for this diabetes type of population. So definitely not worth it. Then just as a separate note on protein, in any sort of calorie restriction diet, whether it's medication induced or not, there's a high risk of muscle mass loss. And so it is important to be mindful that protein needs to be on every single plate, and especially if we are thinking towards going towards a plant-based or plant-predominant style of eating, you might want to start recommending more of a lean protein, maybe fish or lean chicken, or even a protein shake. But you must make sure that your patient does get some protein in this weight loss journey. Strategy number 2 now, that's the strategy for diabetes control and quality of life. There's some people where remission is just not an option. Elderly, high risk of hypoglycemia, and remission is just not an option. And so in these patients, they generally got long-standing diabetes, or sometimes they're just not really or motivated to go and make these dramatic changes in their lifestyle. So here, the answer is simple: add fiber, right? We're not going to overwhelm them with too much. Here, you want to add fiber. You do this by adding whole grains, legumes, vegetables, and fruits to this person's diet. Starchy vegetables in this particular context do not need to be limited in portion control necessarily. They rather need to be catered towards the glycemic requirements of this individual. As I said, because a lot of the time, this is the kind of person where you're worrying about hypoglycemia. You don't want to put them into that risk. And so when your patient does start becoming compliant to these lifestyle changes, the insulin requirements, they will change. And so you need to be ready for that. You need to, sometimes if you've got your patient and they've got access, you can put them on a continuous glucose monitor. Otherwise, this is a really good time to start engaging the rest of your team. Use your dietitian, use your diabetes educator. I don't know if anyone here has a diabetes educator, but that is something that exists with us. Use your health coach, use a complete team approach, because especially as you make these adjustments, it's complicated and it's not easy, and a patient needs their hand held sometimes. So how do we make this changes stick? Lifestyle is definitely not an overnight process. So I'm going to give you a couple of steps that I think that will be practical for you to take on. So first of all, let's change the narrative. We must change the narrative from a diet of restriction to a diet of abundance. Focus on adding healthy food, not necessarily only just removing the unhealthy ones. Then the second is, and you'll see in your little goodie bags, lifestyle medicine, we use SMART goals. So SMART goals are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. In other words, baby steps. And a simple mnemonic that I can teach you from the lifestyle medicine curriculum is called a TAF mnemonic, TAF mnemonic for a food prescription. Type, amount, and frequency. So a simple example, instead of just a vague goal like eat better, you could say, I will eat sorghum, 1 cup, 3 times a week for a month. It's clear, it's actionable, it's measurable, and it's something that a person can work towards. Secondly, finally, you kind of need to be a coach here. We need to move away from that very patriarchal, I'm telling you what to do perspective. It's important to make this shared decision-making process. Take their cultural and financial perspective seriously. Take it to note and take it into account. Also, you need to adjust and understand, I'm happy to talk to you about stages of change, but you need to recognize at which stage of change your individual is. So for example, somebody who's in a pre-contemplative stage of change, hasn't even thought about changing their diet, it's not your place to start judging them and making them feel bad for themselves. Here is your opportunity to give them information, tell them about insulin resistance, tell them about visceral fat, give them an opportunity to think about that without judging them. And again, I reiterate, diabetes is a team effort. You really, really need to get better as healthcare workers in communicating with the patient at the center. So, as I said, we've got dietitians, diabetes educators, we can work with our physios, health coaches. It is a team effort. All right, and then as I said, lifestyle medicine is based on 6 pillars. So I won't leave here without giving you a full 6-pillar tips on how to manage a patient living with diabetes. So number 1 for the nutrition pillar, we talk about eat the rainbow, target for 5 colors every day. So 7 colors, not just on a Sunday. So each colors of, so we sort of have 5 servings of fruits and vegetables every day. We generally are saying now 2 fruits and 3 vegetables, just to sort of balance that out. And each color represents sort of an antioxidant power of the phytonutrients in those vegetables. So it's really about getting those colors. Then physical activity, we recommend, lifestyle medicine recommendations of 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity per week. Now when we talk about moderate intensity, the words is she must be able to talk but not sing. So I always say to my patients, can you sing along? Then you're going too slow. Like you need to feel a little bit breathless when you sing along, break a little bit of sweat. That's what we talk about. And that's only 150 minutes a week. So that's about 30 minutes a day. And a really good way to get a few minutes in here and there is maybe a 10-minute walk after dinner, which lowers your glucose really well. Also really important is resistance training. Obviously in the beginning using body weight is also very good, but progressive resistance training is very important in terms of managing glucose control. Restorative sleep, guys, I emphasize, I don't just say sleep, I say restorative. You know, you have to ask your patient, beyond how many hours of sleep do you get, do you feel refreshed when you wake up? And importantly, you must screen. You must screen for sleep apnea. You must screen for poorly controlled diabetes. It makes people wake up at night to go and pass urine. It's important to screen these things and address them. And then encourage healthy sleep hygiene, like switching off phones before bed. Stress management. I don't know if you guys know about the concept of diabetes distress, but diabetes distress is a real concept. It's also diabetes is really associated with generalized anxiety disorder and major depression disorder. And so these things need to be screened for, first of all, but then also we need to take into account that this diabetes distress raises people's cortisol levels and increases their cravings, again, particularly to that refined sugar and saturated fat. So it becomes almost a vicious cycle. So encouraging your patients to engage in mindful eating, you know, take a pause. Am I hungry to eat right now? If I am eating, I'm going to eat slowly and enjoy and savor this moment. Teach them about breathwork exercises. Again, I would love to show you guys at your tables a little bit of what kind of breathworks that you could do. But doing that kind of stuff is also really important in bringing the blood sugar down. Social connection, I know a lot of you have had that experience. Everybody in the family is eating like this and I have to eat diabetic diet. No, the whole family is going to benefit from eating healthy. And so the family should eat together. And that social connection, you know, being connected and having family has been so strongly associated with longevity that this is an opportune moment to engage a family in the kitchen and at the dinner table. And avoidance of risky substances. Obviously, we talk about moderating alcohol, but I also just wanted to make a note here on sugar-sweetened beverages, including caffeinated beverages. So now what Chef Mokgadi is about to show you is a beautiful example of how this evidence-based whole food approach is not a new or a foreign concept. It's a return to our roots. The philosophy of today's menu is about shifting our perspective. It's about moving from the SAD diet, which is the standard American diet, to the HAD diet, which is the heritage African diet. Traditional African eating patterns across many of our cultures across the continent are typically plant predominant. Our ancestors didn't have access to meat every single day, and it was enjoyed as part of big celebrations and traditional gatherings. And their diets were actually inherently rich with a variety of whole grains and seasonal vegetables and legumes. Unfortunately, though, now with urbanization, people have started mistakenly referring to this as poverty food, or the diets of poverty. And this is now time for us to reframe that, because it's not a diet of poverty. This is a diet of health and a diet of resilience. And it's exactly what our bodies were designed to eat. So finally, today's menu is inspired by a concept most of us know very well on a Sunday, 7 colors. So the traditional 7 colors meal is usually served on a Sunday or a special occasion. But this concept at its core is an excellent example of lifestyle medicine. Those vibrant colors, they're not just about making the plate look pretty. As I mentioned, each color, so every color that's in the skin of each fruit that you have it represents a different phytonutrient and a different antioxidant effect that it will have in your body. So that diversity is extremely important. And then they fight inflammation and support your gut microbiome. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening to me. And I hand over to Chef.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So today, when you arrived, I tried to make sure that what we're serving today, or what we'll be making today, hits on what the doctor just said. So when you arrived, the welcome drink was hibiscus berry, lemon verbena, and cinnamon iced tea. I hope you liked it. Yes. So hibiscus, as you know, is packed with antioxidants. It lowers blood pressure. So if you've got low blood pressure, you can't drink too much of it. So you need to kind of like balance. And it's also a diuretic, so you'll be going to the loo quite often. So it's very good in detox management, but it's also a nice, refreshing drink that diabetics can enjoy. But that's healthy and good for them. So what I did with this tea is it's a tea that's packed with, it's a antioxidant powerhouse, which combines hibiscus flowers, mixed berries, lemon verbena, cinnamon, and honey. And we used a little bit of honey in there as a sweetener. Obviously, honey is not ideal for diabetics, but obviously in moderation. I'm not a very big fan of the other sweeteners, but obviously each to his own. People like canderel, they like xylitol, erythritol, and all the other ones. I find that those are not accessible, they're very expensive. So I try and I use as little of the honey as I possibly can, and I always get the best honey. I always go for like the natural one, which is not oxidated or anything like that. So to also just bring in the health into the drink. So the drink is literally, it's perfect for you guys. It's going to give you energy from berries, from the hibiscus, and the cinnamon just brings in that nice sweetness. And then what we're going to be making today, as the doctor alluded to, is the 7 colors bowl. So 7 colors in that you'll see there's like all colors. We've got red, we've got green, we've got orange, and all accessible ingredients and all accessible vegetables, things that are already in your cupboards, things that your patients would have in their cupboards. It's not stuff they need to go out there looking for, searching for. It's stuff that's really accessible. The sorghum also is becoming accessible to everybody now. You can find it in most fruit and veg shops. You can find it at, it is hot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we need to open. Yes. Yeah. The sorghum is getting accessible now. I can see, because we as chefs have made it an ingredient that's trending. So now what's happened is that the farmers are now growing it and the shops are stocking it at reasonably priced. It's affordable for people, so it is accessible. And it's one of those grains that we've forgotten that we needed to bring back onto our plates, because it's not only good for our health, but it's also good for planet health. It's great for the earth, in that it adds phosphorus into the ground. So when farmers grow it, it adds phosphorus and nutrients back into the ground that has been depleted by monoculture. But it's also packed with fiber for us and antioxidants and all sorts of good things. Also today, another ingredient, key indigenous ingredient that we're using is the bambara nuts, or diko. Growing up, my grandmother used to grow those, also packed with nutrients for the soil, drought resistant, packed with fiber, packed with protein, plant protein. So we're also going to use that onto our bowl. So that's our plant protein that we have. We don't have any meat today. And I'm sorry to all the meat eaters here today, but I wanted to also show you how awesome and delicious a plant-based lifestyle can be. It's not restrictive, it's not bland, it's not boring, it can be exciting and amazing. And I promise you, when you leave here today, you'll be like, oh my word, I didn't know that I could eat something so delicious and there's no meat there. So it's also just trying to change perceptions around how we eat and what we eat. Because we are so obsessed with meat to a point where we've also told ourselves as South Africans that we're meat eaters, but we're not. We're not. Traditionally, we're not meat eaters. We eat meat when it's there and it's available, but we also eat vegetables. We also eat other things. So the whole braai culture, I find, is very myopic in that it pushes an agenda that is really not ours, but we've adopted because it's easier to adopt and it's easier to be like, braai day, let's braai, and we're braaiing people. But you can also braai mushrooms, you can also braai all sorts of other delicious things on the grill. So today is just to, again, to bring in the health, but also to break stereotypes around food and just have a fun around vegetables. And yeah, when you get home, you guys must bring in the fun into your families around vegetables through your kids. And you'll see it's easy as long as you know what to do. The trick is knowing what to do, what to combine with what. And yeah, let's start with the class. And so what I'll do is I'll show you who's doing what. So I've divided, housekeeping, a little housekeeping. There's fruits for everybody. So when you're cooking, if you're feeling peckish, there's fruit here. There's watermelon, apples, peaches, plums. And then we have drinks, also water and